Welcome back to Fantasy Football to the Max. I am your host, as always, Randy Isbell. My co-host is here once again, Mike Mitchell. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I just want to say sorry to all the wives and girlfriends out there in North America because there's going to be months and months of Sundays all tied up now.
With college football starting this last weekend, my girlfriend has already prepared herself. But with us today is a special guest and someone who will be here off and on throughout the regular season when time allows it. That is my co-host on the Football to the Max podcast, Gary Vaughn. Welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, guys. And you're talking about Sunday being filled up almost every day. You know, fantasy, I mean, you've got to sit on your waiver wire. You've got to do all those great things during the week. And, you know, I know you do that a little sporadically, but, I mean, my God, there's going to be so much going on this season. Most guys just put their notice, hey, I'll see you in February.
Yeah, and this is the last Monday before the regular season starts. We will have a podcast Thursday afternoon to kind of go through rankings and preview all the games and all of that. And we'll kind of hit on some of that today as well while we have Gary at our disposal. But Gary, you're going to be writing an article on the new website that is getting ready to come out, talking about startums and situms and some sleepers. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, there's plenty of guys out there that do this, but I'm excited about doing this because, you know, everybody has a different perspective. And I've learned over the years, you've got to kind of follow along with some of your own ideas, but it's nice to have a second ear, a buddy to kind of, you know, bounce things off of. And I'm hoping to be that guy for a lot of people out there who need to know, hey, I'm missing my starting running back this week. I need a sleeper because everybody else hogged all the good running backs. That's my goal. I'm supposed to, you know, get you a few guys I think will do well, and I think we'll do that. And there's plenty of other positions, even kicker. I mean, heck, people are often dumbfounded. Sometimes I'm dumbfounded. You know, my kicker's on a bye week. Who do I get? So hopefully I will be at the disposal of everybody out there, give you a few sleepers, give you some of the solid guys in these matchups this year. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and the three of us are also involved in the weekly rankings page that will be on the site as well, as we will break down weekly position matchups. Who's that sleeper running back that you can start in your flex that you usually wouldn't start, and who's that starting quarterback that has a tough matchup and you might want to look in a different direction. So a lot going on weekly for us here on the podcast, as well as a group with the W2M network, and a lot going on just trying desperately to get ready for Thursday. We just had the F2M Fantasy League. You can listen to us talk about it live on a other podcast. But just really quickly, like 60 seconds, go over your team, Gary and Mike. Just tell us how you feel about it.
Mike, go first. I got to pull mine up again.
All right, well, I am pretty happy with my team. My quarterbacks are Matthew Stafford and Derek Carr, and I am taking the streaming approach, if you will, to my quarterback position, where I'll probably be more inclined to take matchups as opposed to just having a guy that I can plug in every week. So Carr and Stafford. Then I have at wide receiver, I've got Antonio Brown, which is a can't miss, really, and barring injury, of course. He's number one in the league. And my guys to go with him would be Golden Tate. And then I have Jordan Matthews and Deshaun Jackson at wide receiver. So I'm pretty happy with that wide receiver core. And I have a Devontae Parker stashed for when he gets healthy. And then at running back, I've got Lamar Miller, Mark Ingram, Frank Gore, and Carlos Hyde. So I'm pretty happy with that depth as well. And then I'm kind of doing a streaming thing at tight end also with Zach Miller and Jared Cook, who I think might have a breakout season. If he's ever going to have one, it would be this year. And I got Cincinnati's defense even after all that, so I'm pretty happy with my team.
Yeah, absolutely. A very stacked team there for Mike. Gary, what about your team?
You know, I'm looking at my team, and, you know, some of these guys I have are very interesting. One guy is Drew Brees. Now, a lot of people aren't expecting maybe the old Drew Brees, but I think he's still got that opportunity to make things right and really get his team going in the right direction from years past. And I got Blake Bortles to do the job if he can't. That's, to me, a second guy that I could definitely depend on. If Drew Brees is just not having the year he hopes to have. And of course, at the receiving core, I kind of took a little bit less of higher profile guys here, but I did keep a guy like DeAndre Hopkins around. New quarterback, I get it, may not do as much, but man, this guy is still high profile. I think he's got a lot to offer people. And I think a lot of him. And John Brown, I love this guy from Arizona. This guy was a big help to Palmer. He was a guy that you could depend on. I mean, big money guy. I really feel like he's going to help me a ton this year. If, nothing else, give me some decent points. And, of course, I took kind of a flyer on a guy like Travis Benjamin. I know a lot of people aren't really high on him, and some people may be, but this is a guy I really look at as being a home run hitter at times. I could see him having games where maybe he gets you 20 to, 25 points some weeks, and some weeks he may get you 5, but I like the chances of him getting a good year going for him, especially with Phillip Rivers being his quarterback. And, of course, some of the other guys that we have here. I have Chris Coleman, the guy, that RG3 is going to throw to, and hopefully on a regular basis. This is more of a flyer, if you ask me. There's potential in him. I'm not, saying that he's going to do anything great, but I think he has a high ceiling. Chris Hogan, I think Hogan is a guy that Tom Brady is going to fall in love with. I'm excited about that pick as well, just because of the potential there. And, of course, at running back, I've got a guy like Todd Gurley. I mean, man, how can you go wrong with Todd Gurley? So, enough said there. Eddie Lacy's another guy I liked a lot. I was so glad I got him. Sorry, Randy. And, yeah, he was a guy that I was kind of high on as well. I really feel like in a high-octane offense that Green Bay has, he's going to be a big addition to them. I got Latavius Murray from the Oakland Raiders. I know a lot of people aren't just thrilled about him, but I think this Raiders team is going to surprise, and this kid is going to be a really well-rounded back for them, and I think he's going to take care of business. And I, kind of took a few flyers when it came to backup running backs. Heck, I even got Kenneth Dixon. Yeah, injured, I get it, yeah. But, later on this season, he may pick up steam. I got Christian Michael, a guy from Seattle. I don't know if I trust Rawls to stay healthy either. So those are a couple of guys that, I just had to take a flyer on. Wasn't sold that they're going to do anything great, but I'm excited. And, of course, I've got to go out there and pick up a tight end. And the guy I picked was a guy from Tennessee, Walker. I love him. I've loved him in years past. He just makes things happen, helps Mariota get through, drives. So, besides that, I think, I got the Green Bay defense and Walsh as my kicker from Minnesota. Don't know if he's going to do anything great, but I just went with it. Those guys are guys that you can go do throughout the week to week and pick a new kicker, a new defense. So I'm not worried about those guys.
Yeah, kickers are one of those you don't care about during the draft, but you kind of see how things are shaping up in the regular season for sure. And, of course, like you said, you took Eddie Lacy one pick before I did, kind of sticking me with C.J. Anderson, who I'm not that high on. But I love the wide receivers on my team, Julio Jones and Allen Robinson. And I got Sterling Shepard and Devin Funchess to back them up. So I love my wide receiver core. Anderson, Jeremy Hill, not the highest on them. I think Hill's going to have a better season this year. But as my two main running backs, I wish I had a more solid stud there. Took a gamble with Foster. I took the Jacksonville running duo of Ivory and Yeldon, and Alfred Morris just in case Ezekiel Elliott goes down. I take the gamble on quarterbacks in most leagues this year. I think it's pretty deep. I love Kirk Cousins. I think he's being a little underrated. Is he going to be a top 5 quarterback? Absolutely not, but he's going to give you solid numbers week in and week out, I think. And then I took the gamble of RG3. For people that have been listening to this podcast so far, they know that I absolutely love junk time in fantasy. I think that is a commodity that not a lot of people focus on, and it got me into the finals in one league that I shouldn't have even sniffed the playoffs. So junk time is something that I absolutely am interested in, and I want to see kind of how that offense goes with RG3 over there in Cleveland throwing the ball all over the place. One thing I want to go into before we move on, well, actually two, because I'll do this real quick. So, for what it's worth, we did this on Yahoo. Yahoo gives out the grades at the end, and I will say that the three of us, as well as the other Football to the Max host, Sean Garmer, we finished 4 of the top 5 grades. So, congratulations to us, I guess. I mean, we'll see. It means nothing once the season starts, but we'll see how things go. But the one thing I wanted to bring up was there was a trade that was discussed, I guess, while the draft was going on between two participants. We kind of talked about it on the other podcast, but I wanted to bring it up, where one player is trading away Ezekiel Elliott for Eric Decker and Steve Smith Sr. I think all three of us agree that this is a bit of a one-sided trade a little bit. We like the team getting Ezekiel Elliott here. But I just wanted to bring this up because this is a fantasy football podcast, and I want people to understand, just because one trade feels a little one-sided to you, that you feel like one team really won that trade, it is not a reason to veto. Now, if you really feel that the two teams are going out and trying to make one team that much better, like somebody is going, well, I'm out, so here, take my best player, that's vetoable when you think that they're trying to undermine the league. But if both teams feel like they got a good end on this deal, or the better end on this deal, or the guy with Elliott just really doesn't like him, he did get auto-drafted in this situation and just wanted receivers out of it, I get it. It's not for us to manage their teams. There are going to be trades that are pretty one-sided. They happen in the NFL as well. And it's just one of those things that you put that in the memory bank for the guys that are a little weak in trading, and those are the guys you kind of target. And that's what I like to do. I think trading is a huge part of it, and if we start going every trade has to be 50-50 in our minds, no trades are ever going to get done. I just want to get you guys' thoughts on that, though.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that there is certainly, it's survival of the fittest in fantasy football a lot of times, and sometimes you're going to try and find the guys who might be able to give you a trade that swings in your favor a little bit. And I do believe in the veto policy for a trade that is obviously brutal. Like if it was just, say, Steve Smith straight up for Ezekiel Elliott, I probably would have said veto on that. But he is giving Eric Decker and Steve Smith, and while I agree Ezekiel Elliott is definitely the better side of that trade, it's not quite so unbalanced that it's completely unfair. And to be honest, I wish I would have known that he wanted to get rid of Ezekiel Elliott that bad too, because I probably could have found somebody for him also. But it is what it is. I mean, we go out there and try and find ways to make our team better, and you have to do it in the spirit of fairness, where the trade isn't ridiculously unbalanced. Which this one, it might be a little unbalanced, but it's not terribly unbalanced. And like you said, he was auto-drafted because he got to the draft late. He didn't want Ezekiel Elliott anyway, so he would have ended up going somewhere else, which I kind of wish he would have, because then we wouldn't even have this discussion probably. But again, it is one of those things where you try to make your team better, and I think one team did, but I don't think the other team was in any way colluding or doing something that he didn't feel good about himself.
Hey, what do you think?
I think you guys have kind of pointed out a lot of good things. And, for me personally, I've been a commissioner for fantasy football forever now, it seems. And, you always kind of get stuck in this position of, you got to make the final choice here. People are all looking at you. And I used to do things like have a veto system for all the teams. Vote against this trade if you don't like it. It became an issue where people were voting against trades just because they didn't like a certain team. This guy is trying to trick somebody. And I'd look at the trade myself personally and say, that's a pretty even trade. They're just hating on the guy because they don't like the fact that he's good. He wins. And so, yes, I'm right there with you, Mike. You can't just, sit there and hate on it just because you may not like it. But, in this situation, I kind of point my opinions out. My opinions were that I felt like the other team could have even got better receivers than he got. I liked one of them. I think he could have upgraded the other, and it would have been more fair. But that's not my place. Once again, like you pointed out, Randy, you can't, do that. That's their problem. They've got to make those choices, and unless it's the end of the year and they are colluding, I'm okay with it. I mean, heck, if you can make a team weak, at least that's maybe a bye week for me.
Yeah, and just as an example of this, I was trying to go back and look for it. Mike and I are in a league that's been around for about 8 years and is very competitive. And I had made a trade, this was back in 2012, that just made the whole league lose their minds. This was back in the heyday of Jimmy Graham when he was just lighting it up left and right. And I traded with a team who had just lost their running back. Michael Bush was the starter for Chicago at the time, so I said, here, take Michael Bush and any of my receivers minus like the top guy, I think I said. Just any of those and give me Jimmy Graham. And he decided on Randall Cobb, who at that time was a rookie and was very unknown. He was like the third or fourth guy, really. So everyone lost their minds on this trade, almost vetoed it. And I'm trying to tell him he thinks this is going to make it better. He's the one that picked the wide receiver. Let him do his thing. And they finally let it through, though I think it was one vote away from getting vetoed. And needless to say, a few weeks later, Jimmy Graham got hurt, was out for most of the year, and Randall Cobb emerged as one of the best receivers in Green Bay, and it knocked me out of a chance to win the championship. So just because a trade to you feels very one-sided, sometimes it won't be.
Yeah, and the thing is we a lot of times want to lean towards vetoing because we feel like we have a better gauge on the value of the players involved in the trade than maybe the people who are actually making the trade. So if somebody doesn't value a player as highly as we do, it's not necessarily fair for us to say that's not a fair trade because, maybe this guy doesn't like Ezekiel Elliott at all. Maybe he thinks that Ezekiel Elliott is completely overrated and he undervalues him compared to maybe where we might have him in our draft too. So that's something to consider is the player that is involved in the trade, how does he really feel about the guys he's getting and the guy he's giving up?
But let's just kind of get into this more in general now as we have Gary here for the first time. So I just want to start picking Gary's brain here on a few things that we have talked about throughout. You have the number one pick, Gary. Were you going running back or wide receiver? Most drafts are already over, but I just want to kind of gauge where you are looking this year. Were you going more running back or wide receiver at the beginning?
You won't like my answer because my answer is very 50-50. I actually did, and I hated this, but I had the number one pick in two different drafts. And I made two different decisions. One pick, I decided Ezekiel Elliott, and I went running back, and that's classic. That's a move I've been doing for quite a while. And then in the other one, Antonio Brown, the best receiver in football, if you ask me. And so it is a slippery slope, and I think, once again, this is very selective. What kind of team are you going to have? What is your league? Are you a PPR? Are you two running backs and a flex running back, or are they just allowing you to tight end receiver flex? But personally, from my point of view, I'm an old school guy. I still go running back if you have the number one pick, only for this reason. And it is because of the fact that there are so few actual prime real estate backs in this league now that don't split tons of carries. You've got to get those guys off the board and then move on. I think once you get maybe past 4 to 6 of the running backs in the NFL, you need to go receiver. But if that number one pick is available and you can get a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, you can get a guy like Todd Gurley, I just feel like it's almost a miss if you lose one of those guys.
You really went Ezekiel Elliott with your first overall pick.
I went Ezekiel Elliott. I'm buying the hype at this moment. And you know what? I took a big risk, but I kind of just, I know Todd Gurley was sitting there, and somebody disagreed. They told me Todd Gurley, and I'm like, you know what? Gurley's great, but I'd like Zeke's offensive line better.
Well, Gary, it was nice having you on the podcast.
I know you guys are not Ezekiel Elliott fans. Trust me, I listen to you guys talk about him. I get the soft tissue injury. But on the other hand, I've heard plenty of people talk about this injury, and it's basically revolving around rookies. Rookies get hurt, soft tissue, and apparently it's more about the fact that rookies aren't used to the training that they get in the NFL compared to college. So not so scary to me.
No, and I tease, and really the reason why I went wide receiver more than running back early on in drafts, like with the number one overall pick, is I feel wide receivers are a bit safer as far as getting the points. You look at last year, and it seemed like the best strategy last year was not even picking a running back until like the 6th round because every other running back got hurt. So it kind of made me go away from the running back position. But there are several out there, and if you like Ezekiel Elliott a bit more, I'm scared for him based on the field and off the field issues, and so I stayed away. But there are plenty of options out there And, I mean, we're going to find out here in a few days.
Oh, definitely. And I want to hear what you guys have to say about this, but my rebuttal to that is you can get those great receivers, those guys that are top echelon receivers that you really like, of course, Antonio Brown, there's plenty of them on their list. Even DeAndre Hopkins I would throw up there somewhere. But on my argument is if I get a guy that's going to get a majority of the carries in the running back position, there's so few of those guys now in this league. If you get one, you're already ahead of everybody else about, I would say, a majority of your league, at least in that position. And receivers, there's so many of them. And during this season, you can find a really good receiver out of nowhere compared you can to a running back. A lot of times, even though you get good running backs pop up in week 5, they're not the sole possession guys. They usually still split carries, whereas receivers, if they get hot, they get to stay hot usually. So that's my argument against it.
Well, just to throw my 2 cents in there, I like your point there that you're making about the running backs, and that there is really just a handful of them that are going to be the lead back, and they're really not going to be splitting much time at all. I do like that point. The argument that I see for this season more than any other season is those top 3 receivers in Brown, Beckham, and Jones are they are literally a class above the guys behind them. And that's not to say that maybe a guy like an A.J. Green or an Allen Robinson or maybe even a DeAndre Hopkins or something couldn't maybe step up closer to that tier. But I feel like the gap between those top 3 receivers is a greater gap from the next 3 than, say, the top 3 running backs from the next 3 running backs. And that's why I think this is the one season where you could actually say taking wide receiver at that number 1 spot is worth more than taking a running back at that 1 spot because of the space in points expected and from production between those first and second flight players at those positions.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm right there with you. I think they're also a little bit safer. I like taking wide receiver earlier this year because I feel like if I can get 1 or 2 studs, I don't have to pick and choose later on. I know there's a lot of great wide receivers that are going to fall through the cracks and emerge as better players. But I would rather get those 2 really stud wide receivers, solidify that position, take a couple here and there just in case, but then fill the rest of my roster with running backs where, they have the upside, or maybe they have a bit of an injury risk, but if they go down, you have 5 others in place. And you're just trying to find that diamond in the rough as far as running backs go, instead of taking one early on and then if he goes down you feel like you're in big trouble.
Yeah, and I guess I should real quick before I let Gary rebut one more time here. Ezekiel Elliott is not proven to me yet either. So that's not to say by saying that Randy and I aren't high on him, it doesn't mean that we're low on him either. It just means that we feel better about guys like a Peterson or a Gurley, and we both kind of like guys like Lamar Miller, and we get into arguments beyond that. But I just feel like Ezekiel Elliott being a rookie, I don't know if I could feel comfortable spending that number 1 pick on him, no matter how much hype you put on the guy, just because he hasn't played a single down in the NFL yet. So that's a concern for me. From a number 1 pick standpoint, I feel a lot more comfortable knowing a guy like Antonio Brown, who his production is off the charts. I just feel more comfortable going that way. Like I said, this is a situation where I did both. I went receiver, I got Antonio Brown, and I kind of went the route you guys are talking about. So it is a very selective choice. And, Zeke Elliott, is he proven? Not at all. We have no idea what this guy is going to do. But, I look back at Todd Gurley, and people were high on him, and he had a pretty decent year, even though he had some injury concerns as well. I mean, barely got into the league just because of his knees issues and things like that. So I look at this as a risk all the time, and that's your entire fantasy draft is a giant risk. You have no idea how your best players are going to perform, even your worst players. It sometimes becomes your bench is your best team, and so that's the gamble you play. But I agree, Antonio Brown is the one guy
I can look at right now, day one, and say this guy is going to perform. He's going to put big numbers on my board. Ezekiel Elliott, maybe not. So I get that argument, but once again, I still think running backs are important if they are that few select guys, Lamar Miller, even Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott. They're guys that potentially could be these sole possession guys that can just get you over the hump in some of these games.
Yeah, I'd agree. But let's get away from the drafts. Again, this is the Monday before the regular season. Most drafts are now concluded. I want to hit the news that happened over the weekend that we haven't really had a chance to talk about. Gary, you and I will be able to break down the big trade that happened as far as it goes NFL-wise, but I want to break it down fantasy, and that is the trade between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Minnesota Vikings, as the Vikings now have Sam Bradford as their quarterback. What does that do to an Adrian Peterson, a Stephon Diggs? Do you think this helps or hurt some of these players going into the regular season, Gary?
I think receiver-wise, I'm afraid a little bit. If I have Stephon Diggs, which I was a giant Stephon Diggs guy last year, I thought a lot of him. He had some good games. Not real strong towards the end, but he did do a lot of great things. Draft-wise, that's why this year I've kind of stayed away from him because of the Bridgewater incident, and not only that, Sam Bradford being the new quarterback. I think that Sam Bradford is going to have a whole learning curve here he's going to have to get through, and it's going to affect these receivers in a major way. I look at Adrian Peterson being the successor of all this chaos going on with the quarterback situation there in Minnesota, and I look for, in fact, Sam Bradford to rely on him a lot. And I think usually when you get a quarterback in a new system, there's two guys you're going to get a benefit. Usually it's the tight end and the running back. So that's the way I feel. I mean, outside of that, the receivers, I'm a little bit nervous.
What about you, Mike?
Well, I mentioned in the last podcast that I thought Teddy Bridgewater was a season away from playing himself into a game manager category, because that's kind of what we've seen from him the first two seasons. So I don't feel as though Bradford is going to be a really big step down from the Teddy Bridgewater that we've seen so far. I do think that Teddy Bridgewater has a bigger, a higher ceiling that he could attain versus a Sam Bradford. But just based on what we've seen out of both of those guys so far, to me, it's near a wash. I'm not calling it a wash. I think Bradford is the lesser of the two, because I think Bridgewater still has some ability to make bigger plays, and also he's going to run a little bit more. And prior to this ACL injury, his health was certainly better than that of Sam Bradford. But I think the receivers take a little bit of a hit. I think Adrian Peterson stays neutral, or maybe even has a slight uptick, if that's even possible for a guy that gets as much work as he does, just because Bradford is going to be learning the system, and they're probably going to be leaning on the running game a little bit more than they may have been doing if Bridgewater was still there.
Yeah, I think Adrian Peterson has the most interesting change here, not from Bridgewater to Bradford necessarily, but from the idea of Sean Hill to Bradford. I saw a lot this last week doing a couple drafts where Adrian Peterson was dropping in drafts to almost the second round because they were worried that with Sean Hill at quarterback, now they're going to just stack the box and it was going to be tougher for Adrian Peterson, who has seen 8 in the box most of his career anyways. But now with Bradford trying to learn this system, we'll be relying on Adrian Peterson both out of the backfield and in the passing game. A lot of dump-offs. I really think that puts him back up there in that top 3 running back situation. So I like him a lot. I'm with Gary with the wide receivers. I'm down on Diggs and Charles Johnson and Treadwell. I think it's going to take a couple months for them to really kind of click and hit that true potential. I'm not really down on Bradford as a quarterback. I'm not huge on this trade, especially for what Minnesota gave up for it. But as far as fantasy-wise, stay away from him the first couple weeks, kind of see how things go in a different direction other than a Kyle Rudolph or Adrian Peterson. But I think overall, the value kind of stays the same for the rest of these players. Unlike what I think of Philadelphia, who have basically went, okay, we're going with Carson Wentz, if healthy, and we're just going to go there, I think everything falls apart there.
I have a lot of fear for Philadelphia because of those reasons. And, Carson Wentz could be an excellent quarterback, and I'm not saying anything because he's a rookie or anything. We have to see more from him. We have not seen a lot. He had an injury early in preseason, which did not allow him to get the practice in I think he really needed. So we are walking in with the biggest giant question mark in the world when it comes to the Philadelphia offense. Does he have a supporting cast? He does. I mean, Matthews, Sproles, those guys, even Smallwood are hopefully going to take some of that pressure off him. We'll see how that works out. I worry about these receivers. I really do. Aguilar is a guy that people were hoping that would be a big help to that offense. Young rookie last year, a great athlete. But now, once again, he has to take either stay where he's at right now and not perform very much, or maybe even take a step back, and that's what I worry about for guys like that. You can't, I'm not saying for people, if you have these guys on your bench, to drop them. I had the question over the weekend, I'm going to drop Treadwell because, the new situation there in Minnesota. And I said, do not do that. Hold on to these guys. Aguilar, any of these Philly receivers, any of these Minnesota receivers, you may not want to start them week one. Hold on to them, see what the situation lays out, and then maybe, hey, we never know. Wentz may have your guy on your roster sitting there on the bench, and he loves him. Hey, week 2, 3, 4, you've got a top, at least a slot 3 guy.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I'm leaning towards starting to consider Aguilar to be a bust, but I know it's a little bit early to say that. But I keep waiting to see Aguilar take off. And Randy brought up a really good point in our previous podcast, talking about how some of these young quarterbacks tend to find a favorite on the team that they end up going to, and which reinforces your point, which is you can't just drop these guys right away, because this is how certain receivers who may have been second or third on their team suddenly become relevant in fantasy because they're favored by quarterbacks who, for whatever reason, just have a good rapport, or sometimes with the guy who's not expected to be the number one. So, for example, Jordan Matthews might not be Carson Wentz's favorite target. It could end up being a guy like an Aguilar. And the same thing could go with Bradford over in Minnesota. So there's definitely, I think you should kind of play it as a wait-and-see approach. And again, we don't know what we can expect from Wentz. We know that rookies have a tendency to struggle in the NFL, but there's usually at least one guy that benefits from a new quarterback, and we never really know exactly who that guy is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the wait-and-see approach is definitely the way to go in both of these situations. But I just want to kind of touch on a little bit week one, guys. Mike, you and I will break this down a lot more on Thursday. But while we have Gary here, what's that matchup that you're really looking towards fantasy-wise here in week one that you might start somebody right off the bat that you weren't expecting to, just because they have a nice first week matchup?
It's a great question, and looking at the different matchups we have this weekend, I mean, there's one guy that you drafted that I'm really interested in, Randy, and that's Sterling Shepard. I think that guy, he's going to be playing the Dallas Cowboys, and, their defense is very much in flux right now. We don't know what's going to be going on there until we actually get the chance to see them play, and I have a really big feeling Eli Manning is going to have a lot of time to look around, and I would not be surprised if Shepard wasn't a big hit week one, even though people, thought maybe he'd come in rookie, not do anything, do big things. But I wouldn't surprise me if this guy didn't have a 15-point week.
Do you have a matchup you're looking at, Mike?
Well, it's kind of funny, but we just talked about all these Philadelphia guys, and they're hosting Cleveland in week one. So if you were going I know we kind of said maybe don't start these guys in week one, but Cleveland's kind of a juicy matchup at home, and maybe you could make a case for starting somebody in that Philadelphia lineup. I'm not sure who it is. If you have Ryan Matthews, I would certainly probably recommend him so long as he's on the field. But maybe one of those receivers, like a Matthews, can still find a way to have a good game against a suspect defense on the road.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. That really jumps out to me is one that, for the most part, I think you're starting a lot of these guys anyways. But that's the Green Bay-Jacksonville matchup. We talked about it on the college podcast that we had last week with Washington State and Eastern Washington, where I just said whatever the over is, take it. I'm saying the same thing about this Green Bay-Jacksonville game. So it's almost, if you have anyone on either team, just play them, because it could be first one to 50 wins that game.
Yeah, and you could be very right on that. I mean, both offenses showcased a lot last year, and I mean, I'm thrilled about watching that game, first of all, just because of that. And we'll see. I mean, really, this is going to come down to, I think first week jitters, who's going to cause them more penalties, things like that are probably going to determine what happens in that game. Otherwise, it should be an offensive showdown.
And I think one more sneaky matchup here as I look over the rest of the schedule would be Pittsburgh at Washington on Monday night. I think that could also be a shootout game, surprisingly, because neither of those defenses are top-tier defenses. They may be middle-of-the-pack defenses, and both of those offenses are pretty highly touted, so there could be some potential in that game as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to just hit some quarterback matchups, I think, for week one. For those quarterbacks that you probably drafted in a duo, if you didn't get one of those top guys. I've said before that I like to take the two middle-tier quarterbacks and play the matchup. So let's just play the matchup game real quick. And we'll start there with Kirk Cousins in a possible shootout against Pittsburgh. Would you start him, or would you start Derek Carr, who's against New Orleans, whose defense is not that great either?
Ooh, and that's a great question. That's a big one. And, I think, honestly, I like Derek Carr's chances. I really do. And not that I don't love Kirk Cousins and that matchup, but I look at the fact that, Derek Carr has an offense now that I think is going to be really competitive. And I think New Orleans, and they've had to switch defensive coordinators and all that kind of stuff. I think I like Derek Carr's chances to have maybe a little bit better week than Kirk Cousins.
Mike, what do you think?
Well, I think it's kind of an interesting question because the Raiders have had a tendency, for whatever reason, and I know that a lot of people are high on them this year, and I know New Orleans' defense is awful, but they've struggled on the road in season openers, and that's not to say that this is that same Raider team, because I think the Raiders are starting to piece together a pretty solid team, and they may still be a year away, or they may be able to find their way into a wild card or even surprise some teams. But it's one of those things. I do think New Orleans' defense is worse than Pittsburgh's, but Washington is at home. So I'm going to err on the side of caution just because I feel stronger about a home opener than a road opener. So I'll take Cousins.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I'm one of those guys that I believe in Cousins. I think he's going to have a very solid year. I would take him most times. And even though, he is at home and Oakland is on the road, and you bring up some good points there, I'm going to go with Gary here with Derek Carr against New Orleans. That's another game that could very well be a very high shootout. And I really think that you can throw all over New Orleans, and so that's where I'm going.
I should throw this out there real quick. The Raiders in their last 10 seasons in season openers are 2-8.
Well, that just means that they're going to be behind and throwing the ball. I'm fine with that.
Like I said, the Texas and Notre Dame game, I said Texas is due. And so that's the way I feel about this team.
I'd love to see Notre Dame lose. I don't care who it is.
All right, let me do one more head-to-head thing. Let's go Tyrod Taylor, who, it's interesting. He's either the darling of a draft or he just falls in a draft, I think. So do you like Tyrod Taylor on the road against Baltimore, or young Marcus Mariota at home against that tough Minnesota Vikings defense?
Believe it or not, even despite the fact that he's got a tough matchup, I still want Mariota. I think Minnesota is going to see a Tennessee team is much more balanced than they were previously, and I think not only is their running game much improved, but I think that they're going to face a team that's going to be able to wear them down a little bit. And Minnesota, we know that they may be struggling on offense. That defense will get tired. I really feel like Mariota is going to find a way to have a better game. Tyrod Taylor, I actually was a proponent of him last year. If you talked to me last year, I was like, yeah, come on, Tyrod. I'm a little bit nervous with him still. I just don't know that I can trust him not to throw picks.
Well, for me, I guess I'm going to be the dissenting opinion throughout this podcast, but I actually like Tyrod Taylor better. And for one, I think Baltimore's defense is considerably less than Minnesota's. For two, for the same reasons that Gary mentioned with that offense being questionable, I think Minnesota's going to try and grind it out. And I don't think Tennessee's defense is necessarily going to be able to stop a guy like AP in the second half. And I think Minnesota's going to try and wear them down on defense. So I feel like there's going to be more ball control, which equals more time of possession for Minnesota. And I think Buffalo and Baltimore it just feels like that is more likely to be a shootout game to me than Minnesota at Tennessee.
Actually, on this side, I'm going to go with Mike, and it kind of surprises me, but I do feel, as Mike said, that Minnesota-Tennessee games just sounds like it's more of a ground and pound, slow, methodical game. Not the most fun to watch, but with Murray and Henry, I think Tennessee is going to try to match the running game of Minnesota and just kind of work the clock and not get themselves in trouble and try to get the turnovers themselves, not let Sam Bradford have a short field. And on the other side with Tyrod Taylor, Baltimore is deceptive to the big play, and that's what Tyrod Taylor is. He's a big play quarterback. That one deep pass to Sammy Watkins, that is a matchup where I can see that connection working a bit more successfully than most. So I'm actually going to side with Mike on this one with Tyrod Taylor.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But, and I guess there is one more bit of news before we get to the last little game here, and I'll let the Steeler discuss this. So, the Ravens' backfield, which has been a topic of discussion here on this podcast, they let go of Forsett. We talked about it a little bit. Well, now they've re-signed Forsett. Are you interested in him at all, Mike?
Well, I mean, if anyone has listened throughout this fantasy draft preparation, I have told everyone to avoid the Ravens because we just don't know who's going to be the Ravens guy. Now Forsett is back, and clearly this was something that we warned about, where it was looking more like a posturing thing to save a little bit of money for Baltimore, give them more flexibility with their roster. So, but with him back, now what happens to Terrence West, who was for maybe 48 hours pegged as the starter? And you still have Dixon, who's expected to come back in 4 or 5 weeks, who people in Baltimore and a lot of Baltimore fans seem to think is going to end up being the guy there. And then, of course, you have Buck Allen. So it's still the same mess to me that it was before they let Forsett go. The fact that they brought him back just puts it right back to square one when I warned everybody to stay away from him. So really, nothing has changed. They've just made it all confusing all over again.
Yeah, what do you think, Gary?
Wouldn't it be fun if I was the dissenting guy here and said Forsett was going to come and blow people away? And that's not going to happen on this point.
No, I really thought we were going to have a You Betcha Challenge here.
I was ready for a soliloquy.
I know, right? Oh, man. I don't get me wrong. I mean, Forsett's a guy that's been there. He knows everybody there. It's going to be more comfortable. This is not like adding a new back to a new system or anything. The way I look at this, though, is that too little too late. This is a situation where Mike's right. It's not going to change much. You don't put too much stock in this running game until they get a guy like Dixon going, and he's not ready yet. So I just don't buy him.
Yeah, I think Dixon is the running back that you want just to stash on your team. I wouldn't rely on anyone else really until then. So Gary, we have you here for the first time, and we have a segment that we kind of hinted at, the You Betcha Challenge that we're going to go through all season long. Some week-to-week matchups I'm sure will be coming on Thursday. But we want to get your side on the ones that we have so far. So I'm not going to tell you who picked who. But I just want you to give your opinion on all of these You Betcha challenges that Mike and I have accumulated through the preseason. It sound like fun?
Oh, sounds like a blast. I'm excited.
All right, let's do the quarterbacks first. This is all of these except for one, and I will explain the rules for that one, are just total fantasy points for the whole season. So who do you like better, Tyrod Taylor or Kirk Cousins?
I'm going Kirk Cousins on that one. That's a little too easy for me.
Yeah, suck it, Mike.
Just because he thinks that doesn't mean it'll happen.
Do you want me to expound on why, or do I just
Go
name
for it.
them?
Yeah, go
all
for
right,
it.
I'll expound why. Receiving core of Washington Redskins is amazing. Tyrod Taylor, poor guy, has Sammy Watkins. That's about it.
Now, that was my reasoning as well.
And my reasoning was Tyrod Taylor will make up that difference on the ground.
If he can stay on the ground and stay healthy, that's my fear. Running out doesn't always equal staying healthy.
All right, let's go a little lower on the ranking poll here a little bit. Robert Griffin III or Jay Cutler?
This is a very interesting one, and for both very interesting reasons. Jay Cutler is a night and day quarterback that, some Sundays you're like, dude, why didn't I pick him up? Why didn't I have this guy? And other weeks you're like, yeah, that's why. That's why I didn't have him. And then you look over at RG3, new system, new team. You would hope that he would be successful. I think there's a lot of potential in RG3, but I'm going to go with a safe bet. It's crazy. I'm going to go Jay Cutler. I trust him more. The devil situation is what I'm going with.
How's that grab you, Randy?
I was waiting for the second Randy part. That would have been great.
I was saving that one up.
No, listen, I like RG3 just for the crazy upside that he has. It could crash and burn, but when you get that low in the quarterback rankings, I go for the potential upside than the meh that is Jay Cutler.
You're going from your favorite thing, Randy, junk time, and that could be the difference between these two guys, but I got to go with my safe bet.
Well, my opinion is that Jay Cutler is going to have just as much junk time as Robert Griffin III is. And not only that, but I think Jay Cutler has better weapons at his disposal, at least early on. We'll see what happens with Josh Gordon. But until Josh Gordon comes back, I feel like Cutler has better weapons.
That's possibly true. Mm-hmm. All right, we got one more quarterback one, and I'm almost positive I know which side you're going on, and I'm disappointed in you. Eli Manning, over or under 40 touchdowns?
Eli Manning has a lot of potential to go over 40. I know I got a little heated in the draft room about this guy. I just don't know if it's going to happen. I trust me. I love his receivers. His receiving core looks good. I mean, to me, it's getting pretty darn close to equal to what the Washington Redskins have over there. I just worry about Victor Cruz being Victor Cruz. I worry that he's not the guy we remember. That takes him down a notch, and I just don't know. I'm going to have to go on the under on this one. I'm sorry. I just don't know if that's going to happen.
No, and I get it. But with me and Eli Manning, he threw 35 touchdowns last year with basically Odell Beckham Jr. Now he has a young rookie in Sterling Sharp that has high praise. We'll see how he does. Victor Cruz, is he anywhere near the way he used to be? Even if not, that's a great number 3. And they don't really like to run the ball at all. I know they have a new head coach, and maybe the system's a little different, but they've always just been that passing team, even in the red zone, and that's why I think he's going to go slightly over. Yes, he's going to throw his share of interceptions, and I don't think this is going to be a career year as far as he's going to lead this team to a 13-3 record. I think the touchdowns are going to be there a bit more.
I see the Sterling Shepard argument, but like you just mentioned at the end there, passes to the wrong jersey in the end zone do not count as touchdowns. So with that in mind, I just don't see him going over 40. So Gary is on my side on that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hit the running back position, and 2 running backs that went in the first round, late first round in some cases, unless you're Gary. So again, I think I know where he's going with this. But who do you like better this season, Ezekiel Elliott or Eddie Lacy?
Oh, that's another great question, and one to put me on the spot on, because I think Eddie Lacy's offense is going to be spectacular. Aaron Rodgers leading the way. How can you go wrong? That balance that they're going to have is going to be just excellent. The only reason I'm going to say this, and it has nothing to do with just the offensive levels and all that, it has to do with the fact that the Dallas Cowboys have a situation at quarterback, and they're going to depend on the run right now because they got a rookie quarterback. That's going to get Ezekiel Elliott ridiculous amounts of carries, Alfred Morris as well. Eddie Lacy, I think he's going to be balanced. He's going to have a good year, but I see Ezekiel Elliott getting fed more. I'll just say it that way because of the situation Dallas has right now.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if you picked Eddie Lacy here after taking Ezekiel Elliott with your number one pick in your draft, I probably would have had to ask you about that one.
Yeah, so.
And I know his homerism was going to come out, so.
Yeah, it has to sometimes.
That's all right. I'm going to be correct. You're both going to be wrong, and it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, so.
One more running back You Betcha challenge that we've had on here is an interesting one. Jeremy Hill or Devontae Freeman?
This is a little bit easier for me. Then again, it's not. Devontae Freeman, wow, what a spectacular start of last season. It just thrilled us. And then I don't know if the FBI is still looking for him or if he's still in milk cartons, but he kind of disappeared. And there's a good chance that Jeremy Hill can have a great year this year because they really need him to. Let's be honest. Because, the Cincinnati offense did lose some of their receivers, and, we'll have to see how they're going to handle that. This is almost a 50-50, a catch-22. I'm just going to throw one out there. I'll go Devontae Freeman.
I agree with Gary on this one, as I am on the Devontae Freeman side of that. And that's because I don't think that Devontae Freeman is going to I don't think he'll put up the numbers he put up last season, but I do think Atlanta has better balance at offense because Mohamed Sanu is now their number 2, where they didn't really have a number 2 last season. And because that gives them more of a threat in the passing game, I think that teams won't be able to stack up on Devontae Freeman as much as they did in the second half of last season, which I think gives him an opportunity to find more holes in the running game. And while I like Jeremy Hill, you still have Giovanni Bernard there, which could eat into his carries, as could a Tevin Coleman. But Bernard is definitely the passing down guy there, where Devontae Freeman gets a lot of yardage and touchdowns through the air. So I like Freeman better.
Yeah, and that's why I liked Jeremy Hill. Is I think Coleman's going to eat into Freeman's touches a bit more than people expect. And listen, Jeremy Hill had an off year last year. Nothing like his rookie season where he ran for 1,100 yards. He didn't even make 800 yards last year, but he still found the end zone 11 times. I think the power is going to be there. The 3.6 yards per carry is going to improve, and the touchdowns are still going to be there, as he seems to be the guy that they go for once they get to the goal line. So I think Jeremy Hill has that top 10 running back talent, and I think he finally gets back to that level. I think the hate on him is because the hype got too high last year and they were drafting him in the first round and he didn't quite reach that expectations. I think he does this year.
Yeah, you guys make some good points on that. And, once again, this is very hard for me to choose. You guys kind of really put me on the spot on that one. But, Tevin Coleman just does not impress me right now, and so that's why I gave it to Freeman, really, just because Mike just said it. It's just going to be the Freeman show until they get somebody else in there that proves that they can share carries with him.
Yeah, and I feel like Bernard is more likely to be a starter on any other team than Tevin Coleman is.
Agreed.
All right, let's go to the wide receivers. Who do you like better, A.J. Green or Allen Robinson?
This may surprise the heck out of you. Allen Robinson for me. I think that they are going to use him as much as possible. I love A.J. Green, no doubt about it. I just have a lot of fears. And the reason I say that is because once I mentioned we were just talking about Cincinnati. The teams are going to focus on AJ Green so much because is Boyd really going to scare him that much? I don't really think so. So AJ Green is going to be facing double team, triple team at times. They're going to be focusing so much on him. Whereas I think that Jacksonville's offense is going to be so balanced that teams aren't going to be able to jump all over Allen Robinson.
Yeah, and I actually took Allen Robinson in this one, I took AJ Green in this one. And it's just because, you look at what an Odell Beckham did last season as the only guy, really. And I know that Dalton loves AJ Green, and Dalton will be back. And AJ Green is 6'4". He's just a red zone monster. And I know Allen Robinson is a great red zone receiver too, but I feel like because Cincinnati is going to have to lean on AJ Green so much that he's going to have bigger numbers than Robinson. But this one might be the closest one, in my opinion, of all of these You Betcha challenges.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I thought you were flipping sides there for a second, Mike, and going with Robinson, as you should. But it's going to be interesting. All of these, I think, are going to be pretty close. None of them where I go, well, I'm not quite out of it. We'll see once the season starts if I change my tune. But one more which I think is going to be extremely close and very interesting. And I'm just going to pose it like this for you. Who is the wide receiver you want in Arizona?
I've got to go with the guy that I just really embraced and I loved, John Brown. I thought that Palmer relied on him quite a bit last year, and really, he had Fitzgerald, of course, but Fitzgerald just got so old. And not to hate on the guy, I love him to death, but he's not young anymore, and he's not getting the same things done like he used to. We saw the same thing happen to Andre Johnson. I used to be a giant fan of Andre Johnson. Now he's lucky if he can run the 40-yard dash in 2 minutes. It's just such a different game for him now. So I look at John Brown as being that guy they got to rely on.
What's the hate on Michael Floyd, though?
I love Michael Floyd, but not always the guy that is always as dependable. I don't know. I just felt like last year that Brown was the kind of guy that surprised people, and Palmer seemed to have a good rapport with him. I love Floyd, don't get me wrong. I just don't know if I like him better.
And actually, I was just going to say that I think Floyd is more of the dependable out of those two, but John Brown will get you the bigger plays. I think it's going to be really close, but I'd go for the dependable over the big play. What about you, Mike?
Well, I should throw this out there. I know we mentioned it last week, but these guys are going 52nd, 53rd, and 54th. Michael Floyd, Larry Fitzgerald, and John Brown in the draft rankings. So really, it's throw a name in a hat and pull one out, and you'll probably be okay. But I went with John Brown also, and really, if all things being equal, I will take the youthful legs over everything else.
Yeah, and I will say I was kind of hoping that Gary would have taken the old man, Larry Fitzgerald, just so we could have a three-way You Betcha challenge, but not on this day. We'll find one. Let's go to the tight ends. We just had one so far. Who do you like better, Travis Kelce or Coby Fleener?
Kelce, has been a big name as of late, and he's a great tight end. I love him to death. Coby Fleener, I love the fact that he's now with the New Orleans Saints. I love the fact that Drew Brees is now his quarterback, and I think that he is going to get lots of attention. So I'm going Fleener, believe it or not. And I love Kelce. He was one of my picks in most of my leagues last year.
Yeah, and this is probably my other most likely to be very, very close between. I went with Kelce just because I think Kelce has a much higher floor than Fleener does, and we've kind of seen a consistency out of Kelce that we haven't necessarily seen with Fleener because he was splitting time in Indianapolis and because he had a quarterback who wasn't there for the second half of last season. So I'm not 100% sold on Fleener yet. I know he's in the perfect place to be productive, and I also know that we know what Jimmy Graham did when he was with Drew Brees. So you can't argue that quarterback-wise, he has the better quarterback option and the chance to be more explosive. But I feel like Kelsey just felt a little bit safer to me. But if there's ever going to be one of these guys to have a really big season, it's probably more likely to be Fleener. I'm just taking Kelsey because I feel safer about his floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a risk reward situation with Fleener, where new team, new situation with a quarterback who does tend to like the tight end. So that's why I went with Fleener as well. We got one more here. Defensive-wise, which team scores the most fantasy points? The Broncos defense or the Chiefs defense?
Wow, now that once again, Mike said a good point earlier. A lot of these are so close, and this to me is very close. And I almost want to think, are we adding special teams in this? Or is this just purely defense?
Most fantasy leagues defenses include special teams, so yes,
okay,
including special teams.
Special teams too. Okay, in that sense, you know what? It's going to be hard to argue against a defense that is still solid, and the Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl because that defense, primarily that defense. And then you look over, and Kansas City's defense is pretty strong as well, and they did a lot of great things. Adding special teams in it, I'll go Denver. I'm going to go with a safe bet. I felt like they were one of the best defenses in the league last year, and I don't think that they fell off too much.
Yeah, I mean, I took Denver's defense in this too. I actually give the edge to Kansas City's defense, or to Kansas City's special teams, but I don't think that the edge there is enough to make up for the edge that I feel Denver has over Kansas City. And I believe I mentioned when we had this actual You Betcha Challenge come up, Denver's home field advantage is possibly the greatest home field advantage of any team in the NFL, just because teams get winded up there in Mile High. And there is a lot to be said for that altitude. For teams that aren't used to that, it's hard to prepare for it, and you're more likely to get worn out. And I think Denver can take greater advantage. Not that Kansas City doesn't have a good home field too, but I really just kind of lean towards just the environment alone to give Denver the edge.
Yeah, all I was
Seattle.
Yeah, all I was going to say there was Arrowhead as a rebuttal. But the reason why I like Kansas City a bit more, I think Denver's defense, fantasy-wise, is going to take a hit. Not because the talent is getting worse in Denver. I still think they have one of the best defenses in the league. But I think when we made this bet, they were still debating whether it was going to be Sanchez, who's now with Dallas, Gary, and Simeon, who's going to be their quarterback. And I think going the route of either of them, and now it is Simeon, hurts Denver's defense because Simeon is going to go out and make mistakes. He's going to throw more interceptions than Peyton Manning did. He's going to shorten the field for that defense, and therefore more points are going to be put up on the board, in my opinion. And that's why I think I give Kansas City the extra edge, because their offense, more ball control, run the clock, less points scored in those games. And that's why I give them the edge. If you were asking me right now who has the better defense, it's Denver all the way. Just fantasy-wise, with the situation of everything, that's why I lean Kansas City.
It's fair enough. I certainly understand your point there, but I feel like Denver's defense is still pretty close to what it was last season, and that defense won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, once again, the defenses are so selective, but these two are still great. I mean, if you have the opportunity to get either of them, it's awesome. But Denver, once again, kind of like Seattle, home field advantage. Sometimes that matters.
Yeah. So I guess our final tally here for Gary is he agreed with Mike 6 times and me just 3. So it was really nice to have Gary on the podcast. I mean,
suck it, Randy.
It was enjoyable. No, and we're going to have a lot more chances to get Gary in on his own You Betcha Challenges. And actually, I want to just throw one out there. I'll let you even pick whether you want me to be stuck with, well, I wouldn't say even stuck with, but you give me Lamar Miller or Eddie Lacy against Ezekiel Elliott, and I will take that.
Okay, Okay, I'll go with Eddie Lacy. I knew he was your boy. I'll go Eddie Lacy. I'll let chicken.
I will double dip on that pick. Mike, do you have one for Gary?
Well, let's see. I only have 3 choices here. Because he agreed with me on so many.
Well, no, you can come up with anything. They don't have to be tied with ours.
Anyone at all. Well, I wish I had quick access to who Gary had on his Yahoo team, because then I would just go straight to that.
I had Bortles, Breeze. I had who did I have? Running backs Todd Gurley. Oof.
Latavius Murray's on his team.
Okay, I'll throw one for you.
Let's keep it in the same, since you've gone Ezekiel Elliott here. And how about Todd Gurley versus Ezekiel Elliott?
All right, fair enough.
I'll take Gurley.
Okay, fair enough. I'll still stay with Ezekiel. So, you betcha.
Yeah, I like that. How Mike is now on both sides of the Ezekiel Elliott bandwagon. That's gonna be great.
he's just got a fit between Lacey and Gurley. That's
oh man.
All right, but that's going to do it for this podcast. You're going to hear a lot more Gary throughout the season. Again, usually on the Monday version of the podcast, breaking down the week, giving us some waiver wire pickups. Just as the schedule kind of works for him. He works really hard on Mondays. He does the football podcast with me as well today. Plus, he has a wrestling podcast, which they usually do 2 of them on Monday. Both the Monday Night Raw and an extra Wrestling to the Max. So he has a ton of podcasts on Monday, but we hope to kind of fit him in, at least at the beginning of the Monday podcast. And we still need to kind of work through some things to get him to record a little stardom or situm or deep sleeper picks on the Thursday podcast that we can play during that while we break down everything as well. So you're going to hear a lot of Gary throughout. But on Thursday, you will hear Mike and I break down every single game fantasy-wise for Week 1. Expect that in the afternoon. So make sure to subscribe to the W2M Network and all of the facets that you can, whether it's iTunes or Spreaker or the 90 other places that Sean has placed all of these podcasts, or hopefully the website is up by then. So you can go directly there if you're worried about the Carolina-Denver game, but we're going to talk about all 16 games, every position. We're going to break it down all within an hour for you guys, so tune it in there. Gary, any last words before we go?
Thank you guys for having me, and I'm looking forward to us having more great times on this show. And it's kind of cool to have some dissenting thoughts between you two and have these You Betcha challenges. So I'm looking forward to a great season, and it's gonna be fun.
Mike, you want to say anything before we go?
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on here, Gary, and I certainly appreciate you siding with me in 6 out of 9 of these You Betcha challenges, because it just proves which one of us is right and which one of us isn't, obviously, since that's the way Randy went after the very first one.
Yeah.
Then I came back and took 6 out of 8. But that aside, it's going to be great. And you know what? Fantasy football is about dissenting opinions, because not everybody agrees, and no matter who the premier choices are, those guys are wrong too. You know, those of you who follow ESPN or Yahoo or wherever you get your information from, they're not always right. In fact, they're wrong just as much as everybody else is. So the best thing for everybody here is to get as many opinions as possible and hear as many good points as possible, and then make your decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have your own points or any questions that you want for Mike or Gary or myself, plenty of places to leave comments or questions, whether it's on Facebook or Spreaker or iTunes or the website when that launches. So feel free to hit us up with any of that. But until then, for Gary, for Mike, and myself, I hope you guys are ready for football, because it's only a few days away. It is crunch time. It's ready to go, and we will see you on Thursday. Take care, guys.